So we need to take some time to go over the actual tools that I personally recommend and carry to give you some concept, because there's a lot of these things that until I just actually needed it, I wasn't aware that some of these were as critical as they are. I knew most of this stuff existed, but I also grew up around a lot of these tools as a kid. Um, Not everybody has that opportunity. So there may be things here that we discussed today that you've never even been exposed to. Part of my hope is that just to give you some exposure, we're going to go over just the basic hand tools today. We're going to have a separate lesson over just the mechanical tools whenever we start getting into like heavy mechanical work. That's tower work, that's in-depth chiller work, compressor work, stuff like that. And then I'll have another one on just rigging alone and stuff that we're going to need there. So, with that, if you didn't know, when I'm not doing chillers, I am a rancher. You can hear the chickens possibly in the background. I'll do my best to filter some of these noises out, but I got too much to show today to try to do all this in the house, in the office, and all that. So we're out here, out on the back porch. You can't really see it because the sun's really bright, but that's the field, and the llamas are back there. If you just see a random head pop up at some point, it's a llama. Don't worry. Anyway, so let's go over some of the core essentials of the bag. My personal bag of choice. Now, a lot of these things are just my opinions throughout these lessons. Okay, these are not things that you have to buy yourself. You can just take inspiration from whatever I have and whatever brands I have, and put your bag together from there. Mine is fairly hodgepodge because it really was kind of piece built as I went and as I saw that I needed things. So with that, I have become very connected with Vito and using their line. So this is the Tech MCT. This has been a fantastic bag. Their MB is also a great bag, but it's a little small for what we are doing. This is my service bag, by the way. I'm going to talk about bags more a little bit later in this particular lesson. But a lot of these things, the basic tools, you should already have a lot of. If you've done any kind of basic AC repair, you've done RTU work, whether it be light commercial, and especially if you've started getting into any kind of heavy commercial, maybe you haven't started working on chillers or you're just getting into working on chillers, but you've been doing heavy commercial work on chill water system, hydronics, pumps, things like that. There's going to be a lot of these tools that you should probably already have, or it's already on your list of things you need to get. With that, we're going to start with just a basic meter. For me, UEI is a meter that I've come to trust. I call this my beater meter. Okay, so this isn't my like in-depth testing. If I'm going to be doing in-depth work in a drive assembly, anything like that, testing large capacitors, this is not that meter. This is the it got rained on, I dropped and broke it, or got frustrated and hit. No, I'm just kidding there, but this is that meter. So it's taken a serious beating. It's just an extremely basic. It's got all the minimum features that we would need on a routine basis. But I can definitely stand behind that. So that's the G2 Phoenix. It's an older one. I'm sure they've got newer ones nowadays. I don't really know. I've had this one for a lot of years, so take that for what you will. We've also got a set of channel locks. This is a tongue and groove pliers. That's the official name for these. Just channel locks, a name brand that we all got used to. I've got a couple of these. This is the 8 or 10-inch version. I forget which offhand, but should be a basic tool at this point. Basic crescent wrench or open-end adjustable. Uh, we've got our pliers. I'm a big fan of multi-tools. Now, that's not true for everything, so I do carry a set of regular Klein, Phillips, and flathead, number 2 and number 4 on the flat. So I think those are good tools to have because the disposable bits are just a little too disposable for my taste. But as a whole, multi-tools I've come to appreciate because I can get several tools in one, and they've made them good enough now. Now, they used to make them pretty cheap, but it's caught on enough over the years that they actually make these worth purchasing, in my opinion. So this is the Klein multi-tool plier stripper set. I don't remember the actual names of these or the model numbers. Highly recommend a stubby. We've got our dikes or angle cutters, whatever you want to call them. And then I do also heavily, and alongside the stubby is the little, I think this is the 4-inch channel locks, the tongue and groove pliers. Highly recommend those. In addition to having our this little 6-inch crescent. Let's see, having a set of nut drivers, right? So we're just going over basic stuff. These are things that you should probably already have. If you don't, these are things that if you're even going to try to get in this line of work, these are the investments you need to be making first. This basic bag build out is this is just service related, okay? So if you're going to walk up and do any kind of service work, this bag needs to be built well. Anyway, 1/4 inch, 5/16, 3/8, and 1/2 inch nut drives. I do recommend the magnetic ones and having a good impact to go alongside that. So I'm a DeWalt. I've just used them since I was a teenager, back in the old 18 volt and prior days. So I've just kind of stuck with it. Whether it be DeWalt, whether it be Milwaukee, it genuinely doesn't matter. They're both fantastic tool lines, and there's also others that people believe in. Me personally, if I'm going to give you a recommendation, invest in either DeWalt or Milwaukee as your two primary tools for drivers and lights. Having a good work light like this is fantastic. These are the things that I do suggest. And there's a lot of other battery manufacturers. Like there's some things coming out for the battery powered pump side where they're actually partnering with or licensing with DeWalt to use their batteries as a secondary option. So one good thing about DeWalt and Milwaukee is even if you get into other battery lines out there, those are the two first brands most people try to work with. So if you get into a good ecosystem like that, then it could pay off pretty heavily long term. Okay, moving through the bag, psychrometer. This is should be a really key tool. Should already be a part of your bag. If you don't carry a psychrometer, this is just a little pin style, sits in your pocket. It's not that expensive. These are things to have, especially like when we start doing any kind of cooling tower troubleshooting and work. Understanding what your approach is in your wet bulb is critical, right? So from a chiller world, we don't get out away from psychrometrics and stuff. When we start dealing with cooling towers, we're actively engaged in a psychrometric chart there, and we need to understand what our wet bulb is so that we can properly troubleshoot. Having a set of thermometers, okay? Now these are grill thermometers. These are just cheap ones I buy on Amazon. Here's the thing. I'm not a proponent that everything needs to be a big fancy name brand or, expensive, okay? We lose these all the time. They get left here, left there. They break all the time. Even when you buy expensive ones, they may or may not hold up. And then sometimes, when the batteries fail, sometimes they'll do okay when you replace the batteries, sometimes not. These are very cheap components or tools. So I do actually suggest just getting the cheap ones. And I have another thing I'm going to add to this. Your standard thermometers do not fit in a PT port. Now, I've referred to these in the past as Pete's plugs or Pete's ports. I've actually learned recently, in the last few months, that the proper name for a Pete's, which is actually PT, is pressure temperature. I didn't know that until somebody pointed it out to me, so I appreciate that. But these fit in there. So a set of water gauges, I'll cover this more in a second, but this is an official Pete's needle, okay? You can see how small it is. Now they also make a little bit of a larger one for a larger style of PT plug, but this is the official standard needle that you'll see on most systems. This meat thermometer fits in there really well, and it's accurate enough within a couple of degrees that it served me well. I've not had issues with it. And so they're easy to calibrate, but honestly, most of the time, by the time these are starting to get out of calibration, they're already pretty well wore out to begin with, and I just end up getting a new set. It's not a big deal. Anyway, set of thermometers, that should be a basic set part of your tools. If you've done any kind of commercial work, you should have a caliper of some kind. I carry, this is a 4-inch. This is a little 4-inch Empire caliper that you can buy at Home Depot. Very, very cheap, extremely effective tool. When you're trying to do shaft size testing and stuff on a lot of just heavy commercial type of work, these are fantastic. Now, obviously, it's only 4-inch, so we get shafts that go way bigger than that. and we also have bearings and such. So just bear in mind that I also have a larger one, but as just in your service bag, you can carry with you everywhere you go. That little 4-inch caliper, in my opinion, is a must-have, despite chiller work or not. Carrying a set of ratchets with a socket set. So I personally keep a set of standard sizes. Most of the chillers I service, they're all in standard. They're not metric. That has changed over time, but either way, having a, so this particular one I like, not everybody does. It's got the little folding hinge for the head. It gets in the way just as much as it's beneficial, just to give you a warning, but it is also extendable. So even if you found it with a fixed head, just an extendable handle, I do recommend the extension handle for these. It is actually quite helpful, especially if I don't want to break out a breaker bar. And then just having a good set of, at minimum, SAE or standard sockets with you in your bag is really helpful. Again, that's not even, these things aren't even chiller specific. These are just general bag loadouts. Having your pressure gauge, or actually, before I get into these, so I haven't used manifolds in years. I have a set of manifolds, obviously, they're right here, but I haven't actually needed to use these in a lot of, I'm talking, I think the last time these were hooked to a system was 5-6-ish years ago. Okay. And if you're going to have, if this is the way you like to work, and that's okay, I'm not saying that you should follow what I do. I'm just giving my perspective. Have a good 4-port set of manifolds. Okay. Most of them on the market right now are only a 3/8 on the 4th port. I do have some plans to work with some manufacturers and see about improving these things. Have a good set. So this is the Titan. Yellow Jacket makes the Titan and the Brute series. These have been fantastic for me. I just, the goal point here is have a good set of 4 ports, even if they're digital. Like, it's okay if you want the digital sets. That's perfectly fine. Now, one thing to keep in mind with digital or Bluetooth, either or, while digital, like on the manifold, are a faster readout than the Bluetooths are, both digital and Bluetooth do have some lag and delay to them. So there's a few instances, if you're trying to do really precise differential pressure testing on safety switches or anything, you may not actually see the actual trigger point. It may be a couple of PSI below that because these gauges did not update fast enough compared to what the actual mechanical will see. So that is where I do recommend having a set of analog gauges. Have a set of these on hand, high pressure and low pressure, so that, and by high and low pressure I mean a low side gauge and a high side gauge, so that when you are doing a kind of calibration, you have something to where this is real time. As pressure is building, these needles are swinging and moving. There's no delay or lag here. It is instantaneous. And that's one of the things you just need to be aware of when going with either digital or Bluetooth. Now, manufacturers have done a lot, the tool manufacturers, to try to minimize that lag time, but it can't take away the fact that it is still there. And half a second of delay is still half a second. And depending on our circumstances, we can gain a lot of pressure in half a second that genuinely has an impact on what we're calibrating. Now, we're kind of splitting hairs there. Back to the manifold conversation. So I moved from manifolds, especially when you start dealing in these chiller systems and you get into air-cooled or large centrifugals, you either need some really effing long hoses that just is not reasonable, or get you a set of stubbies. And this is what I did. I use these stubbies. I've got multiple sets of these to where I could hook up to every circuit, see the whole machine's pressures just by walking around. And a lot of the times these are on machines that we didn't have the display readouts. That's a relatively new thing in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, that every machine has it and they're reliable, right? So this is where I started with when I went from a manifold, and I would get these little stubbies hoses and with isolation ball valves here. And these are Yellow Jacket. what I like about these is they're a full port valve here on the isolation ball valve. There's cheaper versions of these. Like I know for sure the uni welds I've used in the past, they were not full port, and I do not appreciate that. They had a restriction right here at the ball valve. Anyway, I'd put that on there, and that was my gauge. Just if I even needed the hose. There's lots of times I could just put the gauge straight on, and that was perfectly fine. I use that with a K-type clamp thermometer, and now that also means a larger one. Speaking of which, I think mine's in the other bag over there, but having a large pipe clamp, even if it's K-type that plugs into your meter, is really important to have. This meter doesn't even use that because I stopped using those, but anyway, when I went to this method, I no longer ended up using, it wasn't intentional, it just kind of happened that way. I no longer used my manifolds anymore. Have a set of 4 ports in case you ever need it. But what I did was I moved to stubby gauges, and then eventually that was just a precursor to the Bluetooth. And then I would use brass T-fittings. And so if I needed to connect hoses together or run multiple lines, tanks, whatever the case may be, or needed it longer, I would use these T-fittings. And if I only needed it as a coupling, I could just put a Schrader cap on the third port, and then it just became a straight pass-through coupling. So those are just some things that I practice and how I connect my hoses. So you won't see me use a set of manifolds really ever. Anyway, have a set of stubbies. Now these stubbies you can buy the gauge and then you'll buy the adapter separately. Now I'm not sure, you might find some of these that come factory made as a stubby at this point, because these actually I know became pretty popular for a lot of years. But I did not get that pleasure. I had to buy my gauge sets and then buy my stub adapters and then put it together myself once I got them. So anyway, set of stubbies. I think these are 3-inch. Yeah, these are 3-inch Yellow Jacket stubby hoses with a ball valve. This is what I use, and I have depressors in these compared to my regular hoses. So this is one of my sets of hoses. These don't have depressors, okay? Most of what we're doing on the chiller side, we're moving really large volumes. And a lot of the equipment we service doesn't have Schraders in it. So there's no need to have a Schrader, and we need to be able to move as much volume as possible, as fast as possible, to be efficient. With that means that all restrictions need to be removed as much as possible. So if I had something where I needed to use a depressor, I did one of two things. I either put my stubby on there, or I used a core tool and just pulled that core completely out of the way, and then I would use the core tool itself as my isolation valve from there. So just depending on what my circumstances were, depending on which way I needed to go with it. If I was actually trying to transfer from the machine to a tank or vice versa, I would pull the core. If all I am doing is just trying to get a pressure reading temporarily, I don't need to pull the core for that. I can just use a depressor. So just to kind of paint a picture as to which direction I would go depending on the circumstance. Having a control screwdriver is important. A lot of people refer to these as the thermostat screwdrivers, but we don't really deal with thermostats that much in chillers, so it's a control screwdriver. This particular one is the Klein 32581, 32581. Okay, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic little screwdriver. I also use this is the first generation of the Testo clamps. They are on newer generations since this. The reason I went with Testo versus some of the other brands is this probe for the sensor is removable. So if I ran into a situation where I needed to hook up or to get a temperature on a large line, I didn't have to have a clamp big enough. I could just pull this sensor out, tape it to the line, and I was in action. I was good to go. At the time when I got these, nobody else had a large format clamp on the market, including Field Piece. They didn't exist then. They do now. They have since come out with those. And honestly, I'm neither here nor there on the brand. I've worked with both. I've actively used both for a lot of years, especially working with other technicians in the field that had the Field Piece set up. I got no issues with either way you go with it. Both of them have large format clamps at this point, and they've all got their own thing. So you just choose your ecosystem you prefer and you stick to it. Don't worry about that. Either way, it is worth the money. Now, let me preface this. You need to learn how to use this first, no matter what. If you're not comfortable using analog, do not even start with digital. That's my opinion. That's how I train. And when I bring apprentices up, if he can't show me that he's very skilled with an analog, I am not going to allow him to pull his digital or his Bluetooth out on the job site. That is just something I'm a stickler about. But once you have good solid comfort level and you know how to use an analog properly and read it and interpret it, then these Bluetooths are a very good investment. Having 3, 4, 5 of these spread across the machine and trying to take all your different readings, that's saying that the machine doesn't have a panel that you can just take it from there. This is a lot of work and it's a lot of math to have to do. The good part about these is once you hook them up and if everything's working correctly, it's saving you the extra time to have to run around and actively take your pressure readings and keep everything by memory. So what that did for me was I had a device I could just stand in one central spot, take my readings. I can focus more on listening, and I can focus that time I would spend trying to remember the numbers and do math and keep track of it as it's all adjusting. I can just actively watch the numbers, and it's doing a lot of the math for me for my superheats. And then my brain power is more focused on the troubleshooting aspect than trying to analyze numbers as much, or trying to calculate numbers, maybe a better way to say that. Anyway, they are worth having, absolutely. Now, I do find that these are easier to test on low pressure systems. Now I'm saying like in a vacuum, low pressure chillers, compared to an analog. Now they make analogs that were vacuum, the green portion, inches of water. They make those that are just for that. I never personally used a set. I started using these Bluetooths and using that to compare my low pressure readings to make sure my temp sensors and everything else were acting correctly was actually a really great benefit that I didn't expect to get out of them when I bought them. Okay, so that's a lot of your basic hand tools. Anything else I want to cover? Oh, service wrenches. So everybody will have your standard, what is this, quarter, nope, 3/16 to, was it 3/8? Yeah, everybody's going to have a standard 3/16 to 3/8. This is just the number one service wrench you should come out of school with or whatever you did. They make bigger versions, and you're going to want that. So this is a 3/8 to 1/2 inch, and then I've also seen them make, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch versions of these. I don't have one here to show you today, but I know that they exist. So investing in these is going to be really helpful, especially as you get into larger compressors. Now, at some point, those just don't go large enough, and you're kind of stuck with a crescent wrench at that point. And those are on, say, like larger suction isolation valves, things of that nature. Let's see. I carry an electrical kit. How about this? Grease gun. Grease gun should be a standard part of your loadout. This is the battery powered by DeWalt. This is something you buy after you are already good at using a pistol grip. Okay, your pistol grip should be the first grease gun you have, and you should know that thing inside and out. There's a lot of greasing that we do in this side of the industry, and I'm dropping grease everywhere. So once you have gotten yourself established and you're skilled with a pistol grip, then you can get something like this. I think Milwaukee also has their own version. I'm not sure about that, but this one has been fantastic for me. This is, like I said, this is the DeWalt, a 20 volt grease gun. I have absolutely loved it. It has been a phenomenal grease gun, and I could recommend it if we're going through doing a heavy service, maintenance, whatever the case may be, and you've got a few dozen bearings and pumps to do that day. That gun will save you some serious, what do they call it, tennis elbow? Yeah, That'll help you out. Terms of just basic everyday tools, you've got your impact driver. That pretty well covers. Those are things that you should already have. Okay, if you don't have, think about getting some additional items that are going to be more specific to the chiller side. These Now this is kind of an off one that not everybody does. I found really helpful. This is a terminal remover kit. So this is for like a Molex, okay? When we have Molexes, there's lots of sensors that the factory will ship the sensor with the pins already attached, but they don't ship the plug, the plastic Molex plug piece that we plug into. That you have to do yourself, and so you need. This is just a basic kit. This particular one came off Amazon. I got it as just just needed a kit for now, and it bought with the intention of being temporary, but it has done so well for me. I've never needed to upgrade it. I think this may have been a $10-12, if that, set of terminal removers. Anyway, the point of these is those plugs have little catch pins, and the goal of them is to help pull those pins down so that the old sensor can be removed without damaging anything. And trying to do it with a little screwdriver is quite difficult to do, especially not tearing it up in the process. But then, if you do it correctly, the new sensor it's just a plug and play, as long as you put everything in the right termination point. So that's a common thing that we do on a lot of chiller sensors. I've had to use this kit a lot over the years, just working on different control systems. So that's something that, arguable for chillers, but was worth the investment for me. Another thing is a set of pressure gauges. So these, depending on this, if I have a set of PT plugs, this needle is a really handy adapter to have. This is a 1/4 inch MPT gauge. This one is particularly goes up to 200 psi. I would say it's good to have a set. Like if you're just gonna have one set, get one that goes to 200. That way you're covered. It would be good to have a set of 100 and 200s, and then depending on your circumstances, there's been some buildings I've worked at. We were running 600 psi on the loop, and that's because it was a high-rise building, doing comfort cooling on those. So this gauge is going to get broken if I connect it to that loop. Those are kind of harder to do, but ultimately those I would consider more nuance. Now, that's for me. What I would suggest is best for you, look at what is the highest end of the normal pressures you usually see. Okay? You may be working at facilities routinely that never see above 100 psi. At that point, invest in a set of 0 to 100s. That way you're covered. I routinely saw systems that were running 100, 150 psi for a lot of the work I was doing in downtown Austin. So I needed that 200. Okay, so that's just you need to figure that out for yourself and then make the best decision you can. But having a set of water gauges is critical. If I have a system that it does not have PTs, then I just thread the fitting off and I just thread it into a pressure tap somewhere. Lots of times they may already have a pressure gauge sitting in there, but that gauge, either you can't trust it, you don't know if it's calibrated or not, or it's just obviously busted, either or. You can take one that is calibrated and use it in there. Now, this particular one is also a glycol filled. It is a fluid filled. I do recommend that. It does two things. One, these are typically a sturdier build because they have to hold the fluid. So for that reason, I've had better longevity out of these versus the dry version. They also removes the flutter. So sometimes the needle can flutter a bit as it's moving around depending on the circumstances. Having the glycol in there helps reduce that flutter down and to where it's either very minimal or it's just not even there at all, when it would be if it wasn't glycol filled. So just something else to be aware of. Again, these are going to be, the glycol is going to be more expensive compared to the non-glycol. So go with what your budget is available. If it's better to have the tool than to not have the tool, okay? So just keep that in mind. What I did with all of this stuff, I started off with what I had and then slowly began to build and work my way up from there. When I ran into a situation where I didn't have a tool I needed for that particular job, then at lunch break or whatever, I had to go get that tool. Lots of times, the companies I worked for had a tool allowance that we could use, and it would just be taken out of our paycheck. I had to use that very heavily throughout my career. In total, with all my equipment I've had over the years, I'm easily probably 50-ish grand into my personal tools and equipment. That doesn't include what a lot of the companies would issue us. Now, I'm also non-union. A lot of the union guys out there, you get a full toolkit issued to you. You might need to supply your own basic hand tools and bag, but majority of a lot of what I've actually been talking about here is actually given to you by the shop. Now, that also depends on which union hall you're working for and such. But either way, yeah, these are investments I've had to make myself. I did this over lots. I mean, this is a lot of years. This is over a decade's worth of accumulating these tools and pieces and getting the kit together I needed. And then as I could, making upgrades. So if I had something fairly cheap and budget and it ends up wearing out or breaks or whatever, well, hopefully it got me far enough to where I could save up and get the next thing. And the other side of this is to do the work you need to do. Sometimes you have to just get what you can to be to have the tools to even do the work. Once you're to the point where you can show that your employer that, hey, I can do this level of work, then that constitutes, a higher rate for yourself because now you're capable of doing more things and you at least have a tool that can do it, whether quality or not. Once you increase your value to your employer and they agree with you and you can say get a raise or whatever the case may be, then that you should take those raises, don't increase your lifestyle of living, and reinvest that money into the better equipment and better tools. If you can do that early on before life gets more complicated, like kids and otherwise, you'll really benefit because then you won't have to make a lot of those investments later. Okay, so just my personal opinion on approaching trying to get this stuff. Okay, moving on. This is a flaring and swedge kit. This is something that is needed to have. We deal with a lot of flares and chillers, a lot of flares. So you should have some kind of flaring kit so that you can make a flare and be capable of doing that as you go. Another basic tool would be a scale. Now this is Inficon's Weigh Tech. This is a 220 pound scale. This will do basically the 120 pound cylinders and down. This will take care of you. If you get up into a 240 pound and above cylinder, this is not enough. There are some really cheap, and they are cheap, scales on like Amazon you'll come across that claim to do say 330 on their weight. I've had people get those and some apprentices try to use them and they're okay. I personally probably wouldn't spend the money on that versus having a hanging scale. Okay, so if you go with a 240 pound cylinder and above, you're going to need a hanging scale. And so that's quite literally a scale you'll set up on a set of gantries. You'll need a chain fall and rigging, and then you'll just calibrate everything with it hooked up in the tank sitting on the ground, and then you just have to chain fall that tank up in the air. And then that scale will monitor your tank weight as you go. So having a hanging scale is going to be important, especially if you're using larger cylinders. Not everybody uses those, but at some point, if you progress in this side of the industry, you will. You'll go to 240 pound cylinders. That'll take you to 1,000 pound cylinders, and they have 2,000 pound cylinders. Yeah, like they get big. These things get rolled in on pallets sometimes. But it is important to be able to take their weights, and so we need scales, and using gantries and hanging scale and rigging can take care of that. So having a hanging scale that can do at least a ton, right? So 2,000 pounds or 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, somewhere in there at a bare minimum, And then if you start getting into the larger stuff, but here's the thing, as you're getting into those really big tanks and systems, by that point, like your skill level and your pay scale should also be getting to a point where if your employer doesn't give you those tools, you should hopefully be in a financial position to make those investments. Something else, I have an instrumentation bag, so I have a set of manometers. I've got a duct psychrometer. I've got just a variety of instrumentation tools that I carry in one bag. Having a good set of Allens is important. These little Allen key sets are handy, but are only going to get you so far, and they're usually pretty cheap. I recommend investing in a good set of T handles. T handles are going to be really important. That doesn't exclude having a proper set of just regular 90-degree Allen or hex head wrenches. So I've got a full bag dedicated to just my Allens. Now I do keep a set of Allens in my my main bag here. So just bear in mind, you know, I've got a set here that I carry in my service go bag, but then I also have a full loadout that if I know I'm going to be getting into a lot of Allen bolts that I need to take loose, which we frequently do, especially on say like an overhaul or a teardown. There tends to be a lot of Allens in there. Also, having a good set of Torx sockets. So it's not really a socket. It's either way, Torx. Those are another one to have. Let's see. They're rated in a T. So I actually I've got a small one here. Yeah, so this is a T9 through 40. The T20 and T25 are common ones you'll see for like a lot of screws and stuff. But Torx is something that a lot of people will you'll run into at times depending on the piece of equipment. Solenoid magnets is going to be another important one, and I've got that in this bag. Have a set of solenoid magnets, especially if we're doing like screw unloader testing. Those are really handy and important. So they're very basic. There's a couple of brands. This is a CPS brand. I don't really care which brand you get, but it is a tool that should be in your kit as you're getting into screw and service testing. Also, having a magnet for sensor activation, specifically if we're working on like a train 530 system or the newer TU or let's see, it's a UC controller line. There we go. The train UC controllers. You have to have TU software to do it, but these Malco magnetic bits have actually worked really well for me for those train sensors. I'll use this to activate the sensor for binding purposes. If you're doing a transducer, those require a much larger magnet because these little Malco ones don't typically, or they're not strong enough because of where the activation sensor is for those transducers. So just have a larger magnet on hand that will really help you. On your hose sizes, so these are just regular 1/4 inch. Have a set of hoses for 3/8 and even 1/2 inch. Those 1/2 inch, especially, that's going to be some of your larger side stuff, but at least a set of 3/8 hoses, and I mean 3/8 diameter by 3/8 in and out. Okay, that's going to be a really important piece of your kit and being able to move a lot of refrigerant and transfer things very quickly. I do highly recommend if you're going to start getting into a lot of centrifugal level work and above at any level, then have a set of 1/2 inch as well, and 1/2 inch connections, 1/2 inch hose, and then I've got sets up to 3/4 inch personally. So some of my kit is of a 3/4 inch hose setup. It is also important, in my opinion, to have sets of hoses for different jobs. Okay, and this is where I get into some of my different bag loadouts. So I've got a service bag. I have an Allen bag. I have my instrumentation bag. I have a transfer bag. So if I'm going to be transferring refrigerants, you know, from tank to machine or whatever the case may be, I need to make a transfer. This is the bag I use for that. It's specifically on my smaller scale stuff. Now I have another bag that is kind of a transfer and a vacuum, and that's this one. So I keep a lot of my 3/8 and 1/2 inch set up in here. Some of it I use for vacuum, some of it I use for transferring. So it just kind of depends on what that day holds and what the circumstances are. But that's what these are dedicated to. I also have another set. So I have a True Blue set that I use these strictly for vacuum. This is a vacuum only kit. My micron gauge is in here. A lot of my core tools are in here. That's where this stuff lives. So if I'm going to be pulling an evacuation, this is the bag I'm going to grab. I also have a laptop bag dedicated just for my service laptop and my different adapters and things. I also have a set of, or a puller bag. So specifically, this is my claw puller set. So I've got a few different sizes I can use. This is where all of those live. So just depending on what I'm doing, I've got another case just for my bearing pullers. And I've got another case for socket sets. I've got another bag that I use for just a lot of miscellaneous mechanical tools. Basically, how I organize a lot of this stuff is I build kits per what different job or job combinations may need. That way, if I'm going to be doing a recovery and then doing an evacuation and then charging, I've got just a couple of bags along with my pumps I need to grab. I carry them up and I'm good to go, along with my service bag. If I am doing a bearing repair, I need to change a bearing out, whether on a motor, whether on a fan deck assembly, whatever the case may be, then I have a puller bag just for that. Or if I'm pulling a sheave off or a pulley, I've got a bag for that. I can just grab that bag along with my standard kit. If I'm going to be doing some just basic, say, compressor work, doing a lot of mechanical work, I've got bags to, or I've got mechanical bags just to get the socket sets I need and be able to do that work. And it's just dedicated to that purpose. So that is how I personally organize my stuff. There are people out there that put half of the tools they have in just one big backpack, and they have maybe one or two of those backpacks in total. I personally don't like that. I found that when I did do that in the early days, it really did a lot to mess up my back and my knees. And since I switched to a smaller, more modular setup, I wasn't carrying a lot of stuff I didn't need every single time I was doing different repairs. I really could just grab the bags I truly needed for that specific job, and I was good to go. And it saves a lot of wear and tear on my body. Sure, it's for me, like I'm organized in a way that I know where everything's at, so it's not a big deal. Okay, if you don't work that way, then that's perfectly fine. Just find a method that does work for you. I'm just showing you what mine was. A couple other just small items that are really specific to more of the chiller side stuff that I didn't really have to deal with when I wasn't working on chiller things. One, having tank adapters. So the tanks we service and work on have much larger connections on them. And so they don't use a standard flare. Okay, most of our hoses are using a flare connection. This is a tank adapter. So this is adapting down to a 1/4 inch. You can get these in 1/4, 3/8, 1/2 inch. I carry all those sizes. So that is something that you can buy at the supply house, though they do take a little gasket. So make sure that when you buy them, you get the gaskets with them, because people will go in and steal them sometimes. Just be aware of that. I've also found that I think like it was United Refrigeration sells a little baggie for the gasket kits sometimes. So they don't always have them in stock, but if you can get your hands on one, those are really handy and helpful. So I would recommend that. Having a large set of like large gauge crimpers. So, we're used to having just regular crimpers for standard, up to 12 gauge wire and such. But when we start getting into, these aught sizes, 1/0, 2/0 for these compressors and these motors and such, those crimpers aren't going to do it. And I've seen people try to use things like a set of channel locks to do that. No. So an electrical supply house specifically. So like in my area, I could go to Summit Electrical Supply or Elliott Supply. Either of those, you can get a large set of a large set of crimpers. And basically, like the ones I'm referencing, you could get them to where there was 4 or 5 different sizes in one crimper set, and you would just rotate a set of heads on the crimpers to pick your size, and then you're going to have the the fitting that fits that. So if you're ever having to do lead replacements on these large compressor motors and such, you're going to need a set of crimpers like that. So that's going to be a tool that, again, if your company doesn't invest in, you're going to have to invest in yourself, and carrying those with you so that you have it if you ever need to recrimp a line and replace a feed, which happens frequently, okay? I can't tell you how many harnesses I've had to completely redo because something happened, bad connection, whatever, and they're just completely toasted. Like, there's no salvaging that. And because of the amperages and stuff we're working with, like, these aren't wires that you're going to wire another crimp, okay? This is a home run from end to end. You've got to treat it that way. The last thing I'll talk about, and this is something I've got ideas on how to fix at some point, but an oil pump. You need an oil transfer pump of some kind. I've got a blue Yellow Jacket one, which I realize I left over there. I guess, let me go grab it. Oil pump. So this is an oil transfer pump. This would go down into your oil container. You hook it up here. You can pump oil into your machine. Now, these don't work for going the other direction. So if we need to remove oil from the machine and say this is a low pressure, and so getting it to drain may be an issue, okay? And you don't, now there's other ways of doing that, okay? You can pressurize the machine. There's procedures to that you don't require a pump, but there's another pump on the market that's like a little foot pedestal peg, but it's got a flare fitting on the intake, where this is the intake for this pump here. Those have a little flare. What's nice about those is those are really useful if you have, let's say, like a low pressure and you can't use the system pressure to push all the oil out, then you can draw it out with that other style of pump. So there's a couple of these, but all these are manual, and I am not aware of a battery powered or even corded transfer pump that is designed to operate on chiller oils specifically. They have them for like water and stuff, and I just don't know how much I trust that for getting into what we do, right? We have to be careful with these things. So oil transfer pump is going to be a core part of your kit. We have to transfer and move oil, add oil mostly a lot. So being able to do that is going to be essential. And for the most part, that is the my overall layout. Now I'm going to get into more specifics from here. So we're going to get into our mechanical and on my rigging recommendations. But from a basic hand tools perspective and what we have here, this is a good starting point. This is not absolutely everything, but these are good starting points to have. Something I did not mention was, say, like a megger, okay? Having a good megger in addition to your regular meters. These are some extra little items that get what you can as you can, okay? I've talked about this quite a lot. I'm not going to continue harping on it, but just focus on what you're actually needing on a day-to-day basis more than what you just want to have. I know personally from experience, it's really easy to just fall into the, well, I want to have this. I think it'd be really handy, but you're only going to use it once a week, once a month, versus you have tools you don't have that you would use almost daily, if not, on a daily basis. So those are the ones that, in my opinion, I would focus on first. Get the things that you're going to use that hinder you on a daily basis. Then you can focus on the things that you just kind of use on more occasion. Okay? That's how I personally did it. That's how I got all of this. And that's my recommendation to you as well. Either way. Questions, comments, get to the community group. I'll see you all in there.